the country tonight, courtesy of this cold front, which then also introduces that colder air. As the low pressure develops in the North Sea, some very strong winds are likely through the night across the coasts of northeast England. So that isn't helping matters, especially after the recent damage from Storm Arwen. As well as the wind, it is going to turn wet, already very soggy across Northern Ireland. That rain spreading into Scotland, and then a band of rain whizzing across England and Wales overnight, accompanied by some very, very gusty winds. The winds suddenly whipping up across the south in particular. It will turn colder, but that wind should help to keep the temperatures a few degrees above freezing, although it will make it feel cold first thing. There's very lively winds for a time in the morning across that northeastern coast of England, but it's a blustery day wherever you are tomorrow. Some sunshine, yes, but also plenty of showers, particularly in the west and across the north. And in northern Scotland, those showers turning more and more to sleet and snow, even to low levels by the end of the day. Elsewhere, the showers will be of rain, maybe hail, and temperatures back down to single figures. Add on that wind and it feels even colder. Bit of showery rain across the southwest on Wednesday evening, but then another little set of weather features just push southwards during Wednesday night. That'll bring a mixture of rain, sleet and some snow for a time inland over northwest England, perhaps parts of Wales as we head through into Thursday morning. With temperatures down close to freezing, that could turn things really quite icy on Thursday morning. Potential for a covering of snow, parts of the Midlands and possibly even for a time across parts of the south on Thursday morning. Once that's out of the way, many places fine and sunny on Thursday, but it will be cold. Another weather system will bring more rain into the west later on, but eventually also more milder air.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Afternoon agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. Now, this show isn't necessarily news as you know it. We discuss and we debate the things that are or need to be on your agenda. So, with that in mind, here's what we're covering today. The Prime Minister is set to address the nation on new measures to tackle the spread of the COVID-19 strain Omicron. We'll be going live to Downing Street at any moment. The government pushes back after UK Health Chief Jenny Harries urges people not to socialise unless they have to. But who will win the Christmas tug-of-war over COVID regulations? And it comes as no surprise that today we need to talk about Omicron. Are you worried about the new COVID-19 strain? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines.
Thank you, Alex. I'm Simon Pusey, and this is your news at 4 o'clock. The Prime Minister says the government is not changing its guidance on how people live their lives, and it's down to individuals to decide whether they go ahead with Christmas parties. His comments follow the reintroduction of COVID restrictions, with more than 20 cases of the Omicron variant now in the UK. Face coverings are now compulsory in shops and public transport across England. All travellers to the UK also have to self-isolate until they receive a negative PCR result.
Not going to change the overall guidance. We don't think that's necessary. We don't see anything to suggest that we need to go, for instance, to Plan B. But what we do need to do is take particular precautions against Omicron until we've worked out exactly what kind of a threat it may present. But whatever kind of a threat it may present, Sam, the crucial thing to do is for everybody to go out and get vaccinated.
Well, MPs will vote on the new COVID restrictions later this afternoon. Conservative MP Anne-Marie Morris told GB News she won't back the bill.
No, I won't be supporting the government. I will be abstaining because I do not believe at the moment what is being proposed is proportionate. It is something which I think may result in more than just the wearing of masks. I think what it may land up with is schools closing. It may land up with the plays at schools being cancelled. It may land up with, if you like, the unintentional cancellation of Christmas.
Anne-Marie Morris speaking there, and there's been a mixed reaction from the public.
Most people aren't wearing masks correctly, and it just seems pointless as to why we're doing it. It just seems a knee-jerk reaction.
I think it's a good idea. They do protect other people and me as well. I think, I'm convinced that they do.
People are just, you look around, they're so complacent, but it can happen to anybody. We should all do it.
Well, I think it's a good thing. We've got to look after each other.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has updated Holyrood on the latest COVID developments. She says overall infection levels have been falling over the last week, but urged caution.
I very much hope that as we do learn more, our level of concern will diminish rather than increase. However, while hoping very much for the best, I think it is prudent at this stage to contemplate and prepare for something that is less positive than that.
Meanwhile, Munster Rugby's plans to return home from South Africa have been derailed after a further 9 players there tested positive for COVID. They'll now relocate to a quarantine hotel in Cape Town, where they'll join the First Minister, who tested positive on Sunday. I think we can now throw live to the Prime Minister in Downing Street for an update.
Right now, our best single defence against Omicron is to get vaccinated, or Omicron I should say, is to get vaccinated and to get boosted. If you're boosted, your immune response will be stronger. So yesterday, in addition to offering a second dose to all 12 to 15-year-olds, the independent JCVI recommended that boosters should now be offered to everyone over 18, and that we halve the minimum gap between a second dose and a booster from 6 months to 3 months. That means that over 14 million more adults have now become eligible for a booster in England alone. So I'm here today with the Health Secretary Sajid Javid and Amanda Pritchard, Chief Executive of NHS England, to set out our plan to make this happen. The target that we've set ourselves is to offer a booster to everyone eligible by the end of January. And as with the first jabs, we'll be working through people by age group, going down in 5-year bands, because it's vital that the older and the more clinically vulnerable get that added protection first. So even if you've had your second jab over 3 months ago and you're now eligible, please don't try and book until the NHS says it's your turn. We've already done almost 18 million boosters across the UK, but we've got millions more to do to protect the most vulnerable. Then we'll move down the cohorts rapidly And working together with the devolved administrations, we want to ramp up capacity across the whole United Kingdom to the levels we achieved in the previous vaccination effort. We're going to be throwing everything at it in order to ensure that everyone eligible is offered that booster in, as I say, just over 2 months. Across England, we'll have more than 1,500 community pharmacy sites vaccinating people near where you live. All of our sites will increase their capacity and will stand up extra hospital hubs on top of those already active. There'll be temporary vaccination centres popping up like Christmas trees, and we'll deploy at least 400 military personnel to assist the efforts of our NHS, alongside, of course, the fantastic Jabs army of volunteers. I know the frustration that we all feel with this Omicron variant, the sense of exhaustion that we could be going through all this all over again. But today, I want to stress this. Today, that's the wrong thing to feel, because today our position is and always will be immeasurably better than it was a year ago. What we're doing is taking some proportionate precautionary measures while our scientists crack the Omicron code, and while we get the added protection of those boosters into the arms of those who need them most. So we're going to get behind the men and women of our NHS who've saved so many lives on the front line and run our vaccination programme for a year almost without a break, as they have, and who are going back into the breach yet again. And I want to say, on behalf of the entire country, a thank you to each and every one of them for their extraordinary efforts. And the best way we can all show our gratitude is by doing our bit and stepping forward when our time comes to get that booster. I've been waiting patiently for my moment to come, and it's happening on Thursday, I'm pleased to say. So whenever your turn comes, get your booster and ask your friends and your family to do the same. It's time for another great British vaccination effort. We've done it before, and we're going to do it again. And let's not give this virus a second chance. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Saj.
Thank you, Prime Minister. A year ago this week, this country made headlines when we became the first nation in the Western world to authorise a vaccine for COVID-19. This kicked off one of the greatest collective endeavours this nation has seen in peacetime. And think how far we've come since then. 115 million jabs right across the UK, and a booster programme that is expanding at a phenomenal pace. Today, we've hit that milestone of 18 million booster doses across the UK, and the daily number of jabs has gone up a third since the start of this month. Not only that, but we've delivered more booster doses than any other country, with the exception of the USA and China. And that is something that we can all be very proud of. And I'd like to thank the NHS, the armed forces, the volunteers, and everyone who's done so much to make this programme a success, as well as every single person that has come forward for their jab. Thanks to you, we've made so much progress over the course of a year that we have now weakened the link between cases and hospitalisations and deaths. This is the real-world protection that our vaccination programme provides. Boosters, in particular, play a very huge part. The booster dose provides a much higher antibody response than the primary course, so it's more important than ever that people step up and get protected. We're now dealing, of course, with this new variant, Omicron, which the World Health Organization said just yesterday. They said that it poses a very high global risk. There have now been 13 confirmed cases in England and also 9 confirmed cases in Scotland. And we expect to see these numbers rising over the next few days. There's a lot we don't know, of course, and our scientists are working night and day to learn more about this new variant and what it means for our response. Our strategy is to buy the time we need to assess this new variant, while doing everything we can to slow the spread of the virus and to strengthen our defences. One important defence is antivirals. We've already secured hundreds of thousands of doses of 2 antivirals that have the potential to speed up recovery and to stop infections from progressing. Another, of course, is that vaccination programme. It's true that we don't yet have a full picture of how our vaccines respond to this new variant. But although it's possible for them to be less effective, it's unlikely that they have no effectiveness against serious disease. So the best way that we can strengthen our protective wall is to get as many jabs in arms as possible. I asked the JCVI, our independent expert advisors, to look urgently at our vaccination programme in light of this new variant. And as the Prime Minister just set out, we'll be massively expanding booster doses in line with the JCVI advice. This includes halving the dose interval for booster jabs from 6 months to 3 months, expanding the booster doses to include all remaining adults aged 18 and above, and offering booster doses for people who are immunosuppressed. I'd like to thank the JCVI for acting with such speed in response to this potential threat. This means we're now able to put our booster programme on steroids and protect even more people even more quickly. We've got the jabs, thanks to the brilliant work of our vaccines task force, who've made sure that we've had a strong supply of vaccines all the way throughout this pandemic. And today, we are setting out our plan to get those jabs into arms, and we'll shortly be hearing a bit more from Amanda. We've set some hugely ambitious targets, and we're asking a huge amount from the NHS. But I have no doubt that they will rise to the challenge, just as they have done throughout this pandemic. I know that the developments of the past few days have been worrying for some people, and that we've brought back memories. What we're seeing recently has brought back memories of the strain of the last winter. But although we can't say with certainty what lies ahead, we have one huge advantage that we didn't have back then: our vaccination programme, which has already done so much to keep this virus at bay. But these defences will only keep us safe if we use them. This is a national mission, and we all have a role to play. If we want to give ourselves the best chance of a Christmas with our loved ones, the best thing we can all do is step up, roll up our sleeves, and get protected when the time comes. I'll now hand over to Amanda.
Thank you. So yesterday afternoon, the government accepted the JCVI recommendation to accelerate the NHS COVID-19 vaccination programme in response to the potential threat from the new Omicron variant. That's why I am writing to the NHS, setting out the steps we need to take to operationalise this new guidance. As we've just heard, JCVI have advised the gap between the second dose and the booster should be halved from 6 to 3 months. This means an additional 6.9 million over 40s will be newly eligible for a booster. They've also advised that those between the ages of 18 and 39 are also now eligible at 3 months after that second dose, meaning that more than 7 million people in this age group will be eligible for a booster. And on top of this, again, as we've just heard, JCVI has recommended the introduction of 4th jabs for those who are most vulnerable because they're undergoing chemotherapy or have other problems with their immune system. The NHS COVID vaccination programme was already in its most complex phase, and staff are now working at breakneck speed to respond to this, the biggest change in eligibility since the programme was launched. In line with JCV advice, we'll be vaccinating the most vulnerable first and then opening up further, just as we did in those opening waves of the programme. So while changes to the booking system, protocols and patient group directive are put in place, we will continue to vaccinate the millions of people who were already eligible for their top-up jabs. The booking service will then open up to others in their 40s and older people who would previously have had to wait 6 months before moving then on to younger age groups. So if you were not already eligible, please do not contact the NHS. We will let you know when it's your turn to take up the offer. It is our intention to ensure that everyone eligible for a booster is given the chance to book one before the end of January. To make this happen, we will need to expand vaccination capacity right across the NHS. Hundreds of hospitals are, of course, already jabbing their own staff. We're now asking them to vaccinate other local NHS workers, eligible patients and social care staff as well. Around 30 hospitals are already offering jabs to the public through the National Booking Service, and dozens more will be coming online from early next week. Our hard-working GPs, community pharmacists and their primary care colleagues have delivered the lion's share of the vaccination so far. We're looking at how we can help them to do even more jabs by cutting other burdens on them to free up clinicians' time. And we will ensure that they are properly rewarded for their efforts, particularly when they take time to visit vulnerable, housebound patients who can't travel to vaccination sites. So the payment for standard delivery of vaccinations will increase to £15 a shot until the end of January. To increase capacity on Sundays, when many community pharmacists are not usually open, we'll offer an additional £5 a shot. And to ensure we're prioritising the most vulnerable, we'll offer a £30 premium for vaccinations delivered to the housebound until the end of next month. The CQC have agreed to continue their pause on routine inspections of general practice to help free up clinicians' time. And we're also looking at whether we can safely reduce or even eliminate the 15-minute wait after the jab is delivered, so we could potentially increase the number of people able to get jabs every day in smaller sites like pharmacies. We now have nearly 3,000 sites available across the country. That's almost double the number that we had back in February. But to help make it quicker and easier to get a jab, local areas will also be using mobile vaccination units, which can allow people to get protected basically on their doorsteps. So these are the steps that I will be setting out to the NHS. But it can't happen overnight, particularly given the other pressures facing NHS staff who are working extremely hard. They're working hard to address the backlogs that have inevitably built up in less urgent care, while hospitals cared for more than 500,000 people with COVID as inpatients, and of course many, many more in the community. They're working extremely hard to deal with the rebound in demand for urgent emergency care, and of course they are working extremely hard to care today for those thousands of patients in hospital and in the community with COVID. However, as the world faces this new threat, we can take confidence in what the NHS has achieved so far. Next week, we mark the first anniversary of the world's first Pfizer COVID-19 jab delivered here in England by the NHS. 1 year on, the NHS COVID-19 vaccination programme is closing in on 100 million jabs administered in England. And since the booster campaign began just over 10 weeks ago in England, NHS staff have delivered over 15 million top-up jabs. And NHS staff continue to go above and beyond to vaccinate people. Just this week, during Storm Arwen, an NHS team delivered hundreds of booster vaccinations in North Yorkshire by candlelight. Of course, the success of the NHS vaccination programme has not been down to health service staff alone, but the result of a huge national effort. Since its launch, we've been supported in particular by our amazing volunteers and many other partners. As we launch a renewed drive to protect our country, we're working with our colleagues at RVS and St John to recruit tens of thousands more volunteers, and from Monday we'll start to recruit to 10,000 paid vaccinator roles. So if you are able to help, then please do apply or volunteer. Your help can help us protect more people and save more lives. The NHS and the entire country are living through a once-in-a-generation event, and we all have a role to play. I am confident that with public support, the can-do spirit of the NHS will once again win through. On behalf of all NHS staff, I would just like to thank everybody who's taken up the offer of a jab and urge, again, everyone watching to keep up their enthusiasm for this programme by accepting the invite for each of the jabs available to you when it's your turn.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Let's go to questions from the public first. Alex from Surrey asks, given that the Omicron variant spreads more in crowded and unventilated spaces, why are you not expanding the face covering requirement to higher risk indoor settings such as cinemas and theatres, given these settings are of greater risk than shops and transportation? Well, Alex, thank you very much for that. And that's a question that's been asked a lot in the why aren't we doing face coverings all over the place? And the answer is that we're trying to take a balanced and a proportionate approach, Alex, slowing down the spread of Omicron while we get to the bottom of the exact effect that it has. But Saj, anything you want to add on that?
No, that's right, PM. And of course, we keep all this under review, but we still don't know enough about the variant to understand properly its spread compared to Delta. But as we learn more, we will certainly share that.
Thank you. Tanith from Surrey asks, given the concerns of the Omicron variant being more highly transmissible and possibly bypassing the vaccines, what is the government doing to protect those designated as clinically extremely vulnerable, especially in those who are immunosuppressed, in which the current vaccines do not have the same efficacy as in, say, a normal healthy person who is not immunocompromised? Saj, I think you touched on that earlier on.
Yeah, one thing I can certainly share with Tanith and all those listening is that the antivirals that we procured, the way the antivirals work, the two I mentioned earlier, so we've got 730,000 courses already. One of them has already been approved by MHRA, our independent regulator. I think we were the first in the world to approve it. And because they work in a very different way to the vaccines, we're confident that they would provide a high degree of protection. And of course, the priority for those antivirals will be those that are clinically extremely vulnerable.
Great, thanks very much, Saj, and thank you, Tanith. Let's go to Vicky Young of BBC News. Vicky.
Prime Minister, one of your top health advisors suggested this morning that we should all minimise our socialising over Christmas. Was she right to say that? Do you agree with her? Do you think that we should be cancelling Christmas parties right now? And to Amanda Pritchard, can the NHS, we know there's a lot of pressure, especially going into winter, can the NHS really cope with what is a massive expansion, really, of this vaccine programme? And to the Secretary of State, what more can be done to persuade those who haven't had any vaccines at all? We're, of course, talking today a lot about the booster programme, but we do know that, particularly in hospitals, a large proportion of those there have not had any at all.
Thanks very much, Vicky. So the answer is no, the guidance remains the same, and we're trying to take a balanced and proportionate approach. And as I explained on Saturday, when talking for the first time to everybody about Omicron, we're really dealing with two variants at the same time. We've got the measures in place to fight Delta, which we think are appropriate, and then we're bringing in some tougher measures to stop the seeding, the rapid seeding of Omicron in this country, to give us the time we need to get the boosters in and, of course, to find out more. So those measures, as you know, are the tough measures at the borders, the PCR test when you arrive, quarantine until you've got a negative result, then tougher measures on masks, and then making sure that contacts for anybody who comes into contact with an Omicron case also has to quarantine. We think that's the right balance, and we will keep it, of course, under constant review. And I should say, of course, we've got tougher measures, even tougher measures for travel for those countries, for those 10 countries that seem to have particular problems with Omicron. Is that it? I think that was it. Good, thank you. Let's.
Well, to Amanda about the NHS.
Oh, sorry, go on, Matt. Sorry.
Thank you. Look, I think there is absolutely no doubt that this is the most complex part of the vaccine rollout programme so far. And NHS staff have done, I think, an incredible job. They've stepped up every time there's been a change and responded magnificently through the whole of the past year as the programme has expanded and changed. So I have absolutely no doubt that they will again. On winter, you're absolutely right to say there is significant pressure. I've mentioned some of the pressures on urgent emergency care, as well, of course, as continuing to try and deal with some of the backlogs that were inevitably created across the last 18 months of the pandemic. But whilst we are supporting them with that, we have said very consistently we are expecting this to be a difficult winter. But last year, let's not forget what they achieved, stood up to the second massive increase in COVID cases, began that life-saving, vital rollout of the vaccine programme, and of course dealt with all of the usual winter pressures as well. So I think we can take great comfort from what the NHS has done over the last year and a half, and certainly what I see across the NHS is a huge number of people pulling out absolutely all the stops to do the right thing for their patients.
Absolutely right. So, Emily Morgan of ITV.
Prime Minister, should people be taking your advice or the advice of one of your scientific advisors who said we should be limiting unnecessary social contacts? Can you see why people are confused? And to you, Amanda, even if you did 3.5 million booster jabs every single week, it would still take until mid-February, by my calculations, to get through all those who are eligible. How are you going to do it by the end of January?
Well, first of all, the guidance remains the same. That doesn't mean that people shouldn't take sensible precautions, and everybody should continue, for instance, to wash your hands and make sure that you have good ventilation and wear a mask when you're in a confined space with people you don't normally meet. What we're doing is we're toughening up the regulations in the specific ways that I've outlined to deal with Omicron, and I think that's the right approach. We're taking a balanced and a proportionate approach, but as I said, I think on Saturday we still, the most important thing is we still think that your best single protection against all variants is to get the booster, and I'm still confident that this Christmas will be considerably better than last Christmas, and that remains my view 48 hours later. So,
do you want me to come in?
Yes, Amanda, go on.
So, look, thank you. It is our clear intention to ensure that everyone who is eligible has a chance to book that booster by the end of January. In order to achieve that, I've set out a whole range of things we're going to be doing. There's no maximum to the number of jabs that we're aspiring to give a week on week, but what we do need to recognise is this is going to build up over the next few weeks, and inevitably there will be things that change and adapt as we go along, as has been the case all the way through the vaccination programme. But the range of things that I've set out does mean that we have confidence as we stand that we will be able to make sure that all of those people who are eligible will have that opportunity to book.
Great, thanks. Ben Kentish, LBC.
Thank you. Amanda, just briefly, to meet that target by the end of January, you need about 30 million doses. Could you just confirm that there's no issue with supply of the Pfizer and Moderna jabs when it comes to that? Health Secretary, if I could just ask you briefly about the restrictions that came in today. Governments in many European countries have advised their citizens to wear not just face coverings, but specific FFP2 or N95 medical grade masks, because they're much better at protecting both the wearer and the people around them. As the rules on masks are tightened today, would that be your advice to people here too? And Prime Minister, people could be forgiven this week for asking when this is all going to end. Obviously, we know it's not imminent, and the Omicron variant raises a lot of uncertainty. But can you give people some hope that the day when we won't have to wear masks, we won't have to test or quarantine, when restrictions can be lifted, when that day may come? Clearly there's uncertainty. It's been reported the government was planning initially for it to be potentially next March. Is that still the case, or does Omicron set that back? Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Amanda, you're first.
Well, look, thanks to the outstanding work of the Vaccine Task Force, I am reassured that we absolutely do have the supply we need.
Yeah, on the face coverings, there's already guidance on face coverings, including the types of face coverings that are recommended, and we see no need to change that. I just want to touch, if I may, PM, on Vicky's question earlier on those that are unvaccinated. It's right to point to that. There's some 5 million people throughout the UK that haven't even had one jab, and they really are putting themselves in harm's way, and their loved ones, and we really urge them to come forward. And it is right also, when you look at hospital admissions, that it's a disproportionate number of people that haven't been vaccinated. Sadly, for example, if you look at all the pregnant women that are in hospital because of COVID, almost every single one is unvaccinated. So it's really important that people come forward, and that evergreen offer of a vaccine, whether it's for your first dose or your second dose, will always be there, and we're urging those people to come forward as well.
And Ben, on your question, the crucial thing, the $64 million question or $1 billion question, whatever it is, does this new variant beat the vaccines, and does it beat particularly does it beat the booster? And as I've said over the last few days, we think that the chances are that the boosters will continue to give you protection against every variant, of protection of some degree. That's why it's so absolutely vital to get the boosters, but we need to check that. We can't. This is what we think, but we need to check that, and that's why we're waiting to see what the science tells us. But what I can certainly tell you is that the measures that we've put in place will not last a minute more than we think they are strictly necessary for the protection of public health. Jason Groves, Daily Mail.
Thanks. Mr. Jebbard, you said I think there's now 13 cases. Do you think it's likely that we are now seeing community transmission in England and the rest of the UK? Ms. Pritchard, could you tell us a little bit more about what the troops are going to be doing in this rollout? And Prime Minister, you talked about a proportionate response, but we are seeing people responding to the news they're seeing by cancelling Christmas parties, scrapping nativity plays. Would you urge them to think again and get this in perspective?
Yeah, first of all, on cases, the cases that we identified at the weekend, at the start of the weekend, we were able to confirm quickly that they were linked to travel to South Africa. They were also part of one sort of family cluster. The recent cases that we've confirmed today, we're not able to say whether or not, at this point, we don't know. We're doing that work right now at speed to determine whether they all have a link to South Africa or not. Is there likely to be community transmission? I think we have to be realistic. There is likely to be, as we're seeing in other European countries. And also, as I said earlier, that we would expect cases to rise as we now actively look for cases, because now having identified the variant and our concerns around it, UK HSA is actively looking back at anyone who's travelled to South Africa over the last 10 days or so and searching for these cases and taking action, of course, if they find them.
Thanks.
Thank you. So the NHS has had brilliant support all the way through this programme, whether that's from volunteers or from the military or partnership with a whole range of other community groups and local government. So, once again, we will be working with the military in a range of ways, everything from kind of support logistics through to actually providing jabs. But I would just use this, if I may, as another big plea for people if they are interested in thinking about coming forward as a volunteer, because the volunteer workforce was critical all the way through the whole of the last year and really will be again. And I know that the incredibly dedicated staff who are working in the NHS really value the support that they get from that volunteer workforce and from those wider partners.
Thank you. Yes, and Jason, just on your point about Christmas parties and nativity plays, we don't want people to cancel such events. We think that overwhelmingly the best thing for kids is to be in school, as I've said many times throughout this pandemic. What we're doing is trying to take a balanced and proportionate approach to the particular risk that seems to be posed by Omicron, or certainly is posed by Omicron, focused in particular on measures at the borders, and we think that's the right way to go for the time being, until we know more and until we can get more boosters, as we've been saying, into people's arms. Can we go to Jasmine Cameron Chileshi of the FT, please?
I just had a couple of questions on the new restrictions. So with the changes in the self-isolation rules, businesses in particular have warned of a second pandemic with potential disruption to staff and that sort of thing. Is that inevitable as cases rise? And is there anything you can say to reassure businesses? And just another point, the government has ruled out Plan B, but can you confirm whether contingency measures are being placed, say for example, for work from home measures ahead of Christmas? And can you rule out local restrictions, for example, if there's a surge of cases in one particular pocket of the country, for example?
Thanks very much, Jasmine. So just on the risks of going back to where we were in July, the so-called pandemic, I don't think that is likely to happen, in the sense that so far at least the numbers of cases of Omicron are small, but we'll have to see, and we'll have to keep that keep that constantly under review. On the issue of, you asked about local measures. I certainly think that we went round that a lot in the last year, and I think that we've settled pretty much on the view that having as far as you possibly can, moving together is the way to do it. And sorry, you had a middle question.
It was just that the government has ruled out Plan B, but are there other measures?
Well, look, thanks, Jasmine. We haven't ruled out anything. I've got to tell you, I think another lockdown of the kind that we've had before is extremely unlikely. I'll be upfront with you about that. But we keep everything under constant review in our fight against the Delta variant. We think that it's basically been going our way, or going the way that we planned. So you're seeing, although cases remain high or high-ish, you're seeing a decline in the numbers of admissions to hospital, and a decline in the number of deaths, and that's the crucial thing that we've been following. So at the moment, we see no cause to move to Plan B, but as I've said to you many times before, we've got to keep that under review. But the measures we're talking about to deal with Omicron are as I've said, distinct. Last to Joe Mays of Bloomberg.
Prime Minister, just to press on the work from home point, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are all advising to work from home if people can. So what is your reasoning around the harms of working from home, and why do those harms outweigh the public health benefits that could come from significantly reducing transmission of a potentially dangerous variant? And just briefly on migrants, how do you plan to mend the UK's relationship with France, and when did you last speak to Emmanuel Macron about the crossings?
Thanks, Joe. So on your point about working from home, this is not something that we think currently is necessary for the reasons I gave to Jasmine. We've got a package of measures that we have in place to deal with the Delta variant, and that's principally been rolling out the vaccine, and it's been working. And I repeat what I said just now about the numbers of deaths and hospitalizations coming down. We now have a particular issue to deal with the seeding of the potential seeding of the new Omicron variant, and there what we want to do is focus particularly on tough measures at the borders. We're also doing something to stop transmission by reintroducing face masks in some settings, so continuing to advise them in other settings, but tightening the rules on face masks. And the reason for not proceeding, as it were, with the full Plan B, or proceeding with Plan B, is we want to take an approach that is proportionate and balanced and suits the needs of the present risk. And of course we will change things as necessary, but what we're looking for is the first real reassurance that we need that the vaccines are efficacious against this variant. Even if the efficacy, the effectiveness is reduced, it's still very important to know that whether they're effective or not. And in particular, we need to know quite how effective the boosters are. As I've said, we think there are good grounds for believing that the boosters will give you, under all circumstances, the protection that you need, considerable protection. That's why the most important thing for everybody to do is go out and get your booster. And that's the number one thing that people need to be doing. Thank you all very much. I just want to say something, because nobody's asked about it so far. I just want to say something about Storm Arwen and its effect on the north of the country. And I just want to say how the government. I'm extremely sympathetic to everybody who suffered these power outages, and it must be appalling. I think a million homes lost their electricity. 950,000 have seen that electricity now restored, but clearly for 50,000 people that is not good enough. And I want to reassure everybody that we're working as hard as we can to get power back to those homes. All I can say is that the gusts were going at 100 miles an hour, and talking to the people who operate the grid, they say that there was nothing that they could do about it, but we are doing everything we can to restore power, talking to Northern Power Grid and everybody else to get that fixed. And I appreciate it must be a very, very tough time for those homes that are currently without power. And I'm afraid that is all we have time for. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Well, there we are. That's the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary, joined by the Chief Executive of the NHS, talking about the government's plans for an accelerated booster rollout programme. They hope to see all 18 to 50-year-olds receive a booster shot, that is a third shot of the vaccine, by the end of January. And to do that, they are going to reduce the gap between receiving the second vaccination to having the booster from 6 months to 3 months. Lots more on the Omicron update coming up after the break. First of all, here's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Temperatures up and down a lot this week. It's much milder today, but it's going to be colder tomorrow. And that's because we're going to see some heavy rain and strong winds whipping across the country tonight, courtesy of this cold front, which then also introduces that colder air. As the low pressure develops in the North Sea, some very strong winds are likely through the night across the coasts of northeast England. So that isn't helping matters, especially after the recent damage from Storm Arwen. As well as the wind, it is going to turn wet, already very soggy across Northern Ireland. That rain spreading into Scotland, and then a band of rain whizzing across England and Wales overnight, accompanied by some very, very gusty winds. The winds suddenly whipping up across the south in particular. It will turn colder, but that wind should help to keep the temperatures a few degrees above freezing, although it will make it feel cold first thing. There's very lively winds for a time in the morning across that northeastern coast of England, but it's a blustery day wherever you are tomorrow. Some sunshine, yes, but also plenty of showers, particularly in the west and across the north. And in northern Scotland, those showers turning more and more to sleet and snow, even to low levels by the end of the day. Elsewhere, the showers will be of rain, maybe hail, and temperatures back down to single figures. Add on that wind and it feels even colder. Bit of showery rain across the southwest on Wednesday evening, but then another little set of weather features just push southwards during Wednesday night. That'll bring a mixture of rain, sleet and some snow for a time inland over northwest England, perhaps parts of Wales as we head through into Thursday morning. With temperatures down close to freezing, that could turn things really quite icy on Thursday morning. Potential for a covering of snow, parts of the Midlands and possibly even for a time across parts of the south on Thursday morning. Once that's out of the way, many places fine and sunny on Thursday, but it will be cold. Another weather system will bring more rain into the west later on, but eventually also more milder air.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Agenda on GB News. So, in the last half hour, the Health Secretary has announced that 6.9 million additional over 40s will be eligible for a booster jab, and that all of those eligible will be jabbed by the end of January. Let's update you on the new COVID measures that the government has put in place. From today, masks are mandatory yet again in schools, shops and on public transport. Families of those who test positive will also have to isolate for 10 days, regardless of vaccination status. People arriving in the UK will also have to take a PCR test and self-isolate. Other new details: everyone 18 and over will be offered a booster jab. Children between 12 and 5 will also be invited for a second dose. Well, joining me now is Professor Angus Dalgleish, an oncologist at St George's Hospital. Now, you've written in the Daily Mail today asking if these measures are actually necessary for this particular strain of the virus. What brings you to question what the government's just announced?
Well, first of all, it is a new virus which they called Omicron. It should be called Omicron, emphasis on the "my", and they're acting as if it is really dangerous. The scientists have looked at the sequence and said, oh, it's got some nasty mutations in it, it could be awful. And they ignored the fact that the doctor who reported it said, this is very interesting. I'm getting patients in who they've got some symptoms, but not very many, and they get better very quickly. I wonder what's going on. So they sequence the virus, and they find that it's a new variant, this new variant. And the chairwoman of the South African Medical Association, they've looked at all the data and they said, what is the fuss about? We've reported this because this sequence has evolved and it's causing very little clinical side effects. So why, when you actually share it, there's good science with everybody in the government, do they all react and go, oh my God, it's going to be lethal, we must shut down everything, this, that and the other? If anything, it looks like it might be more infectious without the clinical side effects, which in many ways some people have argued that'd be a very good thing. It would finish off the vaccination really quickly with the herd immunity that I supported with the Great Barrington Declaration well over a year and a bit ago.
Herd immunity became a very taboo phrase to use. But, most people out there saying, well, we don't know yet what this strain can bring. We believe it to potentially be milder, but we do believe it might be able to evade vaccinations. We just don't know the nature of the beast we're dealing with, and they don't want to be caught short. And they're putting in place, one would assume, protections while those calculations are made. But in terms of what they're suggesting, because they're now accelerating the rollout of these booster vaccinations as well, do you think that that's essential in a population where the majority of people have now received 2 vaccinations?
Well, I have great reservations about giving everybody booster vaccines, and then they're talking about fourth vaccines, when you haven't actually measured whether they need it. I mean, if you've had 2 vaccines and you're fairly fit and healthy, you should have a good immune response several months' time. Yes, the antibodies will fade a bit, but if you've actually got a T-cell memory response, you've induced that, then if you come into contact with it, then it's going to recruit the antibodies. They will come up within hours and, you know, fight any second virus, etc. So I've been arguing very strongly that instead of giving the booster vaccines to all and sundry, they should measure it. They should measure the T-cell and the antibody response.
They've said that you can't measure T-cell response. You're saying that that's not true?
That's not true at all. I can measure the T-cells in the laboratory tomorrow, and they're offered, the test for T-cell to COVID is offered privately all over the place. A lot of my patients have had them. So that I will not accept that when you expect everybody to have PCR tests 3 or 4 times a week and part of the surveillance. So one test to see whether you need a booster, I think, is perfectly reasonable.
But there's no hazard, is there, carried with having a little top-up of the vaccine? It's not going to be injurious to society or to an individual?
Well, it's assumed that the more the merrier, but we don't actually know that. So that's why I would like to do a test to see, does the person need the booster?
Now, in terms of some of the other things the government have announced, for instance, the compulsory or mandatory face mask on public transport, in schools, again, which I always think is quite harrowing for kids having to have their face covered all day. There's a big argument going on, and it has been from the beginning of the pandemic, about how effective face masks are at controlling the spread of the virus. And it seems to be general medical consensus is that, well, of course, if you're going to cover with a respiratory disease your breath, prevent that from circulating or, you know, particles of spittle, then surely that's a good thing.
Well, this has been very controversial right from the very beginning, where they said it wasn't necessary. Do you remember that? And then they suddenly changed their minds, and everybody had to wear the face masks and going about their business and everywhere enclosed, etc. And there's been several studies done on whether face masks are any good. Most of them find it very hard to justify them. And there's been a very good review. I think I saw it in the Spectator, a review of all these trials that was conducted by someone very qualified to do it, who basically at the end of the day said you couldn't really make a case for or against them. So if you can't make a case for them, then they do have some negative effects if you wear them all day long. So I think that it is very much more of a statement issue to make sure people, by wearing a face mask, they're saying, I'm aware of the COVID's around and I'm taking my role in not spreading it. I think that's the main issue.
It's a nudge unit response. Professor, thank you so much for coming on the programme. I always love to hear your insight on these things. As a very well-respected scientist who spent a lot of time studying viruses. So fantastic to have your input on this topic.
Thank you very much.
Well, so, with just a few weeks until Christmas, you'd be forgiven for feeling far from festive, given those news headlines. Variously, health chiefs warn against festive socialising. Boris calls in the army to push for vaccinations, and global markets fall after Omicron warning. The government has said today it's up to individuals to decide on Christmas parties and events. But how do we maintain a positive mindset in the midst of it all? Well, let's talk to psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. Many people must be really struggling with a sense of here we go again. I certainly am. Do you think we're going to see quite a lot of resilience from the population now that we've sort of been through the mill a few times when it comes to the restarting of COVID regulations?
I think we'll be very conflicted. The picture that you painted just there does seem rather bleak. But the upside is that, in a way, we went through a disturbed Christmas last year, and on the whole, most people got through it okay. There were plenty of disappointments and maybe lots of frustration, but it was survivable. And I think that knowledge should give us a degree of comfort. The problem is, after that Christmas, with the vaccine rollout, we were all led to believe that that would be the game changer. And for a lot of people, they would reasonably have expected that that would have meant that Christmas would be protected this time round, or whatever winter festival season you might be celebrating at this time of year. And the problem is that uncertainty looms on the horizon, and human beings, unfortunately, are not very good with uncertainty. So to use a word that you used in your introduction, mindset, it's all going to be about how we actually control our mindset in a scenario where there's quite a lot that's out of our control.
But this is going to really test the government, isn't it? Because there's going to be people out there who look at their own empirical evidence, if you will, people who might have already had COVID and know they've had it and recovered and haven't caught it since, who have had vaccinations, so when they had COVID the first time around, it might be mild. People like me, and by this point, pretty much everybody I know has had COVID. And it's getting harder and harder, I think, for people to want to be part of the pantomime when their own experiences around them are telling them that they're probably in the clear by now. How on earth does a government manage that situation?
Clarity of message is always going to be really important. So at the moment, it's very much about focusing on the benefits for example, the booster program, and also to give some sense that this is a really important thing to do, which is why I think the announcement today about, the number of people who are going to be recruited to get more jabs in arms is probably very important. But looking more widely about how we as a nation can actually make this festive season work for us, it's very much about having a sense of perspective, maybe focusing on the things that you can control that bring you joy, and maybe also recognizing that there are some elements of Christmas, let's not forget, that many people find very annoying or frustrating or downright unappealing. And last year, that gave people, the pandemic gave quite a few people the opportunity to not have to go to events that they didn't want to go to, or not see people that they didn't want to see. So that's part of the mindset. What are the things that I can control that bring me joy? And what are the things that I can have a sense of perspective around that I don't have to worry about anymore?
Now, before you go, Lucy, what about the masks being brought back in for children at school? It strikes me that that is cruel, especially with younger children, to force them to cover their faces in, we've been told it's communal areas, let's see if it bleeds into classrooms. But how on earth are children supposed to manage in a learning environment when they're wearing face masks, when their teachers are wearing face masks?
Yes, we as creatures really respond to bodily cues, but particularly facial cues. And that's why having a mask when you're still learning about facial cues, it's all very well for adults because we can understand about what happens with people's eyes and how they might change and give us a sense of emotion. But for smaller people, they haven't learnt those skills yet, which is why it will be a very frustrating, it's probably a necessary thing that has to happen within certain areas of a school, but to actually recognize that it is going to make learning more difficult. It's going to make that child-teacher interaction much more complicated. And therefore, teachers are going to have to be much more nimble to think of ways to actually convey information while their children are respecting the rules.
Lucy, thank you ever so much for joining us. Lucy Beresford. Now, you're watching the Afternoon Agenda, and there's lots more to come after a short break. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Just joined the afternoon agenda on GB News. I'm Alex Phillips. Now, this show isn't news as you know it. We discuss and we debate things that are or need to be on your agenda. So, still to come this hour. She's accused of trafficking girls for sex with billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. Straight from court, the lawyer for one of Ghislaine Maxwell's accusers will be joining me live. Now it's a shocking story of secrecy and abuse. We'll be speaking to the author whose mother faked illnesses and broke her limbs because of Munchausen syndrome. And there's no escaping it, is there? Oh, we really need to talk about Omicron. Are you worried about the new COVID-19 strain? That's the agenda for the next hour. What is on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines with Simon.
Thank you, Alice. Yes, this is your news at 5 o'clock. The Prime Minister says all adults will be offered a booster jab by the end of January. Speaking at the latest COVID briefing, Boris Johnson confirmed the military will help the NHS with the rollout. In the last hour, MPs have voted in favour of new restrictions, including face coverings in shops and on public transport in England. Travellers coming into the UK also have to self-isolate until they receive a negative PCR result. Cases of the Omicron variant have been increasing across the UK in recent days.
There'll be temporary vaccination centres popping up like Christmas trees, and will deploy at least 400 military personnel to assist the efforts of our NHS, alongside, of course, the fantastic Jabs Army of volunteers.
While the Health Secretary Sajid Javid is urging everyone to get jabbed ahead of the Christmas festivities.
This is a national mission, and we all have a role to play. If we want to give ourselves the best chance of a Christmas with our loved ones, the best thing we can all do is step up, roll up our sleeves and get protected when the time comes.
Meanwhile, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has updated Holyrood on the latest developments with the Omicron variants there. She says overall infection levels have been falling over the last week, but urged caution.
I very much hope that as we do learn more, our level of concern will diminish rather than increase. However, while hoping very much for the best, I think it is prudent at this stage to contemplate and prepare for something that is less positive than that.
Munster's rugby's plans to return home from South Africa have been derailed after a further 9 players tested positive for COVID. They'll now relocate to a quarantine hotel in Cape Town, where they'll join the first player who tested positive on Sunday. The remaining 38 players and staff have all returned negative results and continue to isolate in their rooms. French police have demolished a makeshift migrant camp near the Channel port of Dunkirk. Armed officers in protective suits pulled down tents and shelters along a disused railway line. The action comes as France opens the door to talks with the UK, saying it's writing a letter to Boris Johnson with proposals to tackle the migrant crisis. EasyJet has posted losses of more than £1 billion for the second consecutive year because of the pandemic. The airline is also seeing signs of demand decreasing after the discovery of the new COVID variant, but says it's too soon to say what impact it'll have on the industry. Despite the uncertainty, the company's still hopeful trading will return to pre-pandemic levels over its current year. Money will be offered to homeowners in Wales to encourage people to rent to the homeless. This is part of the Ending Homelessness Action Plan announced by the Welsh Government today. As part of the strategy, property owners will be able to lease their houses to councils so they can be leased to those at risk of homelessness. In return, landlords will receive money for renovations and tenants will be offered help to improve their situation, such as mental health support. Prince Charles acknowledged the appalling atrocity of slavery in Barbados as the country became a republic. During a ceremony to mark the occasion, the Prince of Wales said this was now a new beginning for the nation. Its first ever president, Dame Sandra Mason, has now replaced the Queen as the head of state. Editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine, Ingrid Seward, says the decision to part ways wasn't unanimous.
If people want to break and make themselves free from the crown and have a president, which they have now, they have Sandra Mason, who is a very, very popular. But the sad thing, I think, is it wasn't a vote by the people, it was a vote by the government. So the people of Barbados, they love the Queen. And it used to be called Little England. The island is very English in its way. But it wasn't a referendum like we had here. It was a decision by the government.
I'll bring you the very latest headlines in around half an hour's time. Until then, it's back to the afternoon agenda with Alex.
Just when you thought it was safe to embrace life, to shop, to holiday, to hug your wife, to show your face and forget about space, send your kids to class and raise a glass that the old normal is here so we can banish all fear. Forget it. Like a Christmas Grinch, the WHO have run their finger down the Greek alphabet and settled on new nomenclature for a novel variant, which, in keeping with its already infamous mega mutant status, is fitting for a Marvel comic villain. All hail the coming of Omicron. And just like that, the familiar pantomime of how low can you go has resumed. Mandatory masks on the bus, now a mass face mask fuss. Headlines ring with harbingers of the ping. The unions are crowing about bubbles in schools as borders are closing and back come the rules. Today, we really need to talk about Omicron. Well, joining us now is retired NHS surgeon Dr Tony Hinton. The Prime Minister's reiterated today that the government is taking a proportionate response to the new COVID strain. Do you agree?
I don't think it is proportionate, actually. The data we seem to have at the moment from South Africa, and I was speaking to some South African doctors this afternoon on a Zoom call, is that this new variant spreads faster than Delta, but it seems to be much less virulent. So out of 900 patients in South Africa so far that have proved positive, a lot have had no symptoms at all. The rest have had mild symptoms. No one has gone to hospital yet with it, not been admitted, yet let alone go to intensive care unit or dying from it. Now, we have to be a little bit careful because the South African population isn't the same as a Western European country. They have a younger population. They only have about 5% of their people over 65. So, of course, it could be that at the moment this is just because it's a younger population. But in general with viruses, what happens is as they mutate, they transmit faster and easier, but they get milder in what they do. And we can already see that in the variants we've already have. If you go from the alpha to the beta to the delta, roughly the percentage chance of dying from each of those has halved each time, from 2% to 1% to 0.5%. So it would be reasonable maybe to at least hope that this next one is maybe 0.25%. Now, if we've got a variant that spreads very quickly, and the other thing about this variant is the vaccines don't seem to make any difference. So, for instance, the 4 people that were infected in Botswana, all 4 were double jabbed. If you think about how it's already spread around the world, starting in South Africa, it's in Canada, it's in Germany, it's in Hong Kong, it's in the UK. How did those cases get there? Well, it's long distance plane travel. And to get on the plane and do long distance plane travel, you've got to have a vaccine passport. So those people must all have been double jabbed to be able to do that. So it's infecting everybody. If it does that and it causes very little trouble to people, we have almost a natural vaccine that hopefully will end this very quickly. And this will become like a cold by next year.
So in a sense, what you're saying, this could be the dying embers of the pandemic, where the virus naturally must evolve and mutate in order to evade vaccines, in order to become so innocuous that it can almost become symbiotic within the human population. And the government, by rolling out its vaccination campaign, could be preventing something that transversely could actually be more productive than the vaccination campaign.
I don't think it will prevent it, because looking at the data we've got from all these people that have caught it that are already vaccinated, doesn't seem to make any difference whether you're vaccinated or not, whether you catch it. The important thing is that it's a very mild disease, it would seem so far. It's probably going to be 2 weeks, maximum of 3 weeks, till we really know how it starts to affect a European, maybe older population. But I think at the moment, we should err on the side that this is positive news, not negative. So I wouldn't have said to the government, just take all restrictions away, but I wouldn't have said, put any extra restrictions in. I would have just waited to see.
But is the government perhaps not behaving with pragmatism here, while there are still so many unknown unknowns, you know, in terms of we must wait and see how this affects the European population? We think that it causes a much milder strain. I mean, surely in order to get to the bottom of that checklist clinically, medically, empirically, that perhaps the government are being just prudent in exercising a degree of caution first?
No, I think what it is they're doing a something must be done attitude. And what they're doing is something, so they're doing it. But there's no evidence that it's going to make any difference either way. I mean, the Health Secretary stood up in Parliament one day last week and made a very strange statement along the lines of, it looks like this new variant can evade the vaccines, therefore get your vaccine booster. Well, that's just completely illogical.
It was a mixed message. It wasn't lost on me, I can tell you that much. Dr. Tony Hinton, thank you so much for coming into the studio as
Pleasure.
well.
Thank you very much.
Always lovely to have a bit of company. Well, my next guest is Andrew Preston, a microbiologist at the University of Bath. Now, Andrew, you've just heard what the government's response is to the new strain. Do you think that they are simply exercising pragmatism and caution, or do you think that this is a relatively heavy-handed approach?
I think it is pragmatic. Just heard what Tony was saying, and of course there's a massive caveat with that. If we wait and see, and then the answer turns out to be, oh dear, this is a lot worse than we had feared, it's far too late then. The consequences could be fairly catastrophic. Governments have to do something. They're not in a position where they can do nothing when faced with a threat. So I think doing nothing is just simply not, it's not something a government is able to contemplate. So there are too many unknowns. It would be a huge gamble to just sit back and say, well, let's hope that this particular variant doesn't cause severe illness when it gets into the vulnerables. And of course, that's something we just don't know about yet. It would be great with hindsight to look back and say that this was an opportunity to naturally immunise everybody. But again, natural immunisation doesn't necessarily provide the optimal protection. So this idea that all the immunity that we must have must mimic that from natural infection, again, ignores the fact that many of these infectious diseases have evolved in order to circumvent natural immunity, because they have to do that in order to maintain their niche on the planet. So, vaccine-mediated immunity can actually outperform natural immunity because it's not there, it's not designed in order to maintain the infectious agents niche in the population. So there's a number of things where I'd have to unfortunately disagree with that approach.
That's why we have you on here, to give the audience the full picture. Now, in terms of, let's follow the science, as the government like to say. In terms of the way viruses behave in general, as they do mutate and evolve, would it be atypical for a virus to mutate in a way that does create more severe infection? Or is it the case, as has been suggested by a couple of my previous guests, that by and large, in order for a virus to survive and become endemic within a society, it almost does have to become innocuous? Because if it starts bumping off its host, it's got nowhere to go.
It depends, really. It depends when the transmission occurs. So if it's able to transmit to a new host, to some degree, the consequences of what happens to the host it was in is inconsequential. So it doesn't always follow like that. And of course, what we don't know what will happen with COVID in terms of the numbers of different types of this virus that might start to establish over the years. So, people keep comparing it to influenza. Of course, we live in fear of a major new pandemic, of a new influenza strain coming with very high levels of mortality. Now, I know there are clear differences between COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 and the influenza virus. So to say that all viruses naturally sort of temper down to the very mild innocuous is again, that's not strictly true. It depends very much on the infectious agent in question and the way it interacts with the host, the way it transmits, when disease, whether disease is required for transmission. Doesn't appear that it does for SARS-CoV-2, but also, again, when that transmission takes place, then what happens in the host for many infectious agents is inconsequential.
Now, despite you agreeing with the government's pragmatism in terms of addressing this with expedience to make sure that if there was a looming disaster, we're hopefully not going to be hit with the full force of it, would there be any part of you deep inside that might have a glimmer of optimism that this new strain could herald the beginning of the end if it does show the virus to be mutating to become a less harmful version of itself?
The virus will evolve dependent upon the environment that it's in. So this may be a very particular evolution. So we possibly has evolved within, over a longer period of time within a single immunocompromised host. That's one of the scenarios with which this would fit. That's very different from a virus naturally evolving through its transmission cycle in a heavily immunized population. So this may be the way that we see things in the future. It may be a one-off. So it is really difficult to tell.
I wanted you to give me some festive cheer there. Thanks so much for coming on, Dr. Andrew Preston, who is, of course, a microbiologist, and we love having him on. There you go. We give you all sides of the debate here at GB News and leave you, the viewer, to make up your own minds. Well, let's talk schools. Joining us now is Frances Gilbert, a school teacher and author, and we're also joined by Michelle Catterson, who's the head teacher of Moon Hall, a special needs school in Reigate. Now, there are calls from unions to reintroduce things like class bubbles or maybe even close schools early. What's your view? I'm going to go to you first, Frances.
My view is we need to be very cautious about closing schools. I think it's really important for our children's mental health that they are in a school as long as possible. Obviously, we have to follow sensible medical advice, but I really think that the government and schools need to be imaginative about this and put resources into things like having possibly outdoor heaters and marquees. Perhaps, even adapting the curriculum so that children are outdoors a bit more, doing things like physical education, which we know is really, really important for their physical and mental health. So we really are cautious about, closing schools. We now know the terrible impact that closing schools has had on our children, and we've effectively created a lost generation from closing schools. So, where before in the very early days of the pandemic, I was quite, pro closing schools because of the terrible infection rates. I really think now we need to be much more cautious about this.
Now, Michelle, what about you? Is it time to slam shut the gates early and everyone be sent home for their Christmas holidays?
No, absolutely not. I absolutely agree with Frances. It's so important that we keep schools open for as long as possible. I think one of the things that's always underestimated is the social impact of children attending schools. And also we have the safeguarding impact of children attending schools. There are children where school is their safe place and home is not their safe place. And as a head teacher, it's really important that we keep schools open as long as possible. And as much as possible throughout each of the lockdowns, our school was open. We have quite a high percentage of children who are deemed vulnerable, who have an education healthcare plan. And for them, it's just not possible for to learn at home, they need to be in school and they need to have access to their teachers who can explain things to them. And particularly in my school, where I have a percentage of children who have special educational needs, they need that specialist support to help them to understand the curriculum.
Now, I'm going to stay with you just for a second, Michelle, because I want to move the conversation onto masks. And it strikes me as the head teacher of a school with a significant percentage of children with special needs. How has the wearing of masks affected your school population, and will you be bringing them back?
So we have actually introduced masks from this week in communal areas. I won't be introducing masks in the classroom, and I have only introduced masks for our older pupils in year 7 to 11 and not for my younger pupils. And I think I had to strike that balance because as head teacher, I've got a balance between supporting my staff and making sure that it's a safe place for them to come to work and they feel reassured. But also it is so difficult for my children in particular at school to be able to understand their teachers if the teachers are wearing masks. They find it difficult on occasion to pick up on body language and social cues. I met some prospective parents this week and some very young children had come to the school to look around. They were anxious, they were nervous, and if I'm wearing my mask, they can't tell if I'm smiling, if I'm happy with them. And anxiety around school has increased since the pandemic, and it's so important that we're looking after our children's mental health as well as keeping everyone safe. So that balance is a difficult one to strike, but we're trying our best.
Francis, I'm going to throw the same question to you. Masks in schools, is this necessary when we think that children, they might be able to transmit, but there's a debate anyway about how effective masks are and how compliant some children are when it comes to using masks properly. Most of them, especially the disposable ones, actually run out of purpose after about 20 minutes. Are you pro-mask or anti-mask when it comes to your students?
Well, I certainly find it very difficult to teach with a mask on personally myself. I do feel that we possibly have to let it to the individual choice of the pupil or teacher, because I've seen lessons where teachers have been teaching in masks in my role as teacher educator at Goldsmiths, where I'm a lecturer in education, and it's worked fine. But then I've also seen it not work at all. So I do think that it's, we do need to give kind of people personal choice in terms of possibly teaching it with masks in the classroom. That said, as has been said already, walking around the school, it would be sensible, I think, for people to wear masks. It seems to be sort of the best advice, particularly in crowded places. But I also said that, resourcing schools, so possibly, it's a bit more like the hospitality sector, with restaurants having marquees and heaters outside. Schools often have a lot of room out in the playgrounds. Possibly, that can be experimented with. I would be, obviously, it's much safer to be outside without a mask, from what we know, and that might be a way forward. We used to have in England in the 1920s and 30s outdoor schools, which were very successful, and it'd be quite interesting to do a bit of serious scientific research around the consequences of things like that. So I do think the government need to support schools to be creative with this in particular. And I agree that teaching in a mask can be really difficult and quite off-putting for many children if the teacher is in a mask. But we do need to leave it to people's individual discretion, I think, ultimately on that one.
Now, Michelle, coming back to you, there's been talk about whether we should be reintroducing the bubbles again at schools. And I'm assuming you may indeed have pupils with some particularly complex underlying health issues. If someone tested positive for COVID in a particular year group or a particular tutorial group, would you expect the rest of them to all go home? How would you handle that?
I think it's just something that we need to constantly monitor. I have meetings daily with my bursar and with the school office. We're monitoring those positive cases that are coming in. We have asked certain year groups where we've noticed that there's an increase in positive COVID cases to do daily testing. At this point in time, I don't believe that we need to introduce bubbles. It is something that we could potentially reintroduce. I'm all in favour of introducing measures as and when they're necessary and not just doing everything all at the one time. We're doing it in a staged process. We have had an increase in cases at the school. And as I said, we're monitoring those closely. And at this point, I don't feel the necessity to introduce any bubble systems at the school. My children are relatively compliant in wearing the masks in those communal areas. And it seems to be working well. We've reinforced our message to staff, to parents. We're sanitising a lot more. We've got windows open, even in this much, much colder weather, which can be different. But as Frances said, we're adapting to the way that we need to teach now. So we've adapted our uniform. Our children are allowed to wear school hoodies instead of just the blazers and the shirts. And also things like our nativity, we're taking it outside, and we've got a carol service. It's going to be outside as well, because these types of events are so important for children, especially at my school, where they might not thrive academically, so they thrive on the stage or on the sports field. And it's really important that we allow them to shine in those areas as well.
Michelle Catterson, Frances Gilbert, thank you so much for giving us all the perspective from the educators. Now, after the break, the lawyer for one of the women accusing Ghislaine Maxwell of sex trafficking will be joining me live. First, it's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Temperatures up and down a lot this week. It's much milder today, but it's going to be colder tomorrow. And that's because we're going to see some heavy rain and strong winds whipping across the country tonight, courtesy of this cold front, which then also introduces that colder air. As the low pressure develops in the North Sea, some very strong winds are likely through the night across the coasts of northeast England. So that isn't helping matters, especially after the recent damage from Storm Arwen. As well as the wind, it is going to turn wet, already very soggy across Northern Ireland. That rain spreading into Scotland, and then a band of rain whizzing across England and Wales overnight, accompanied by some very, very gusty winds. The winds suddenly whipping up across the south in particular. It will turn colder, but that wind should help to keep the temperatures a few degrees above freezing, although it will make it feel cold first thing. There's very lively winds for a time in the morning across that northeastern coast of England, but it's a blustery day wherever you are tomorrow. Some sunshine, yes, but also plenty of showers, particularly in the west and across the north. And in northern Scotland, those showers turning more and more to sleet and snow, even to low levels by the end of the day. Elsewhere, the showers will be of rain, maybe hail, and temperatures back down to single figures. Add on that wind and it feels even colder. Bit of showery rain across the southwest on Wednesday evening, but then another little set of weather features just push southwards during Wednesday night. That'll bring a mixture of rain, sleet and some snow for a time inland over northwest England, perhaps parts of Wales as we head through into Thursday morning. With temperatures down close to freezing, that could turn things really quite icy on Thursday morning. Potential for a covering of snow, parts of the Midlands and possibly even for a time across parts of the south on Thursday morning. Once that's out of the way, many places fine and sunny on Thursday, but it will be cold. Another weather system will bring more rain into the west later on, but eventually also more milder air.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
I think you'll be happy in the future too.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to the afternoon agenda. First, let's get a check on the news headlines with Simon.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, I'm Simon Pusey. Here are your latest headlines. The Prime Minister says all adults will be offered a booster jab by the end of January. Speaking at the latest COVID briefing, Boris Johnson confirmed the military will also help with the rollout. In the last hour, MPs have voted in favour of new restrictions, including face coverings in shops and on public transport in England. Travellers coming into the UK will also have to self-isolate until they receive a negative PCR result. Munster Rugby's plans to return home from South Africa have been derailed after a further 9 players tested positive for COVID. They'll now relocate to a quarantine hotel in Cape Town, where they'll join the first player who tested positive on Sunday. The remaining 38 players and staff have all returned negative results and continue to isolate in their rooms. French police have demolished a makeshift migrant camp near the Channel port of Dunkirk. Armed officers in protective suits pulled down tents and shelters along a disused railway line. The action comes as France opens the door to talks with the UK, saying it is writing a letter to Boris Johnson with proposals to tackle the migrant crisis. Prince Charles has acknowledged the appalling atrocity of slavery in Barbados as the country became a republic. During a ceremony to mark the occasion, the Prince of Wales said this was now a new beginning for the nation. Its first ever president, Dame Sandra Mason, has now replaced the Queen as the head of state. I'll bring you a full news update at the top of the hour.
Imagine so much of what you knew growing up was a lie. Imagine that those lies came from your own mum. Well, that was the reality for Helen Naylor, who found out her mother Eleanor faked illness and abused her in years of diaries after she passed away. This shocking discovery of deceit and family betrayal is shared in her new book, entitled My Mother, Munchausen's and Me. Well, author of the book and Eleanor's daughter, Helena Naylor, joins us now. Helena, thank you so much for coming on. Helen, thanks so much for coming on. What a poignant story. I mean, when you discovered these diaries and started leafing through them, what was it like? It must have felt like an emotional earthquake.
Absolutely. Nothing that I thought I knew was true. Everything had been a lie, and that was really shocking. It was shocking to find out that she'd faked these illnesses and then, and written about it quite plainly. But also then to find out about the abuse that I suffered in childhood was a real shock. I didn't expect to find anything like that.
When you say the abuse you suffered in childhood, what sort of things had she been writing in her diary that you discovered, if you don't mind sharing with us?
No, that's fine. So it started off as neglect, I suppose. She would go, when I was a week old, she left me in my Moses basket at home to go shopping. When I was 6 months old, my parents went out for the evening and just left me in a hotel room. They drugged me. They fed me Chinese food washed down with whiskey when I was a few months old. And probably the most shocking was that I found out that my arm had been broken at some point around the age of 2. And I still don't know really how that happened, only that my mum was responsible for it.
And do you have any recollections of your childhood that sort of support these really grim discoveries you made for your mother's diaries later in life? Or did all of this come as a blinding shock?
No, it sort of unravelled a little towards the end of her life. She'd been diagnosed with mild Parkinsonism, but very quickly got a lot worse. And Parkinson's it has certain symptoms and certain tests. And so it was quite obvious that she was faking it from quite early on. And that made me realise that the ME she'd struggled with when I was a child, supposedly anyway, was actually all made up as well. And there were moments when I was growing up that, I might have realised. But because she was my mum, I believed what she was telling me rather than what I saw.
And did you know anything about Munchausen syndrome before that? And let's talk a little bit about that syndrome. It's sort of chronic, clinical. How would you describe it? Hypochondria?
I would describe it as like the opposite of hypochondria. So with hypochondria, you fear being ill, but with Munchausen's, you want to be ill. So you fake symptoms, you go to the doctors a lot to try and get diagnoses for certain things. You want to take drugs, prescription drugs, and you hurt yourself in order to get medical attention. And it's all this idea of being a victim, being an ill person that gains you sympathy from other people and attention.
Knowing that your mum suffered from this syndrome, has that enabled you to sort of reconcile with what happened? What are your emotions towards your mother now? Were you close to her, would you say, when you were a child?
I really felt like I was very close to her. We used to have a lot of conversations together, and I thought we were particularly close. I now realise that actually those conversations were pretty toxic. And that she was telling me I was fat and ugly and stupid and being really quite cruel to me. But my feelings now are quite difficult. I don't feel like, the idea of Munchausen's gives her an out, really. There's no excuse for abusing a child. And we are all responsible for our mental health. And the fact that she didn't seek help is a real shame. But at the same time, I don't really feel angry towards her. It's this strange thing. I guess I just feel numb about what happened. And it's almost easier for me to be angry at the people around her who didn't do anything, like friends who must have seen things, doctors, health visitors who must have seen things, and yet nothing was ever done.
Well, let's talk about the role of your father in all of this. Do you get a sense that he was complicit in this?
Yeah, absolutely. From the diaries, I can see that he knew that Mum was making it up. But I think he was quite an isolated figure, and I suspect she had coercive control over him, which obviously in the 80s and 90s wasn't really something that was discussed or an idea that was really understood. So I feel like he was quite trapped. But like you said, he was complicit. I can't get away from that.
This is a shocking thing to have to contend with, whatever age, to suddenly find that your biological parents have not had your best interests at heart. In fact, may even go as far as, being your abusers. How have you dealt with that? How have you been able to help yourself recover from that awful, sudden sort of sense of divorce and detachment from your kith and kin?
It is really hard. I think to some extent it's going to be an ongoing process. I still find it very hard to put together the memories I have with the knowledge I now have of what my mother was and who she really was. But I have had quite a lot of therapy. I'm having EMDR, I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's to do with rapid eye movement and processing traumatic memories. And that's been amazing. I'm actually quite evangelical about it. It's been really, really good.
And you're a mother yourself now, aren't you? Has that sort of affected the way that you parent? Do you think it's sort of making you feel like it's an extra protective mother? You feel like you want to reconcile some of the wrongs that you went through?
Yeah, definitely. I've always wanted to be like the best mother I can possibly be, and I want my children to feel safe and loved, which is something I didn't feel growing up. And I think it's made me a better mother, really. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the book, My Mother, Munchausen's and Me. I mean, I guess this was pretty cathartic for you to write. Was it a labour of love, or did you manage to get it down on paper pretty quickly?
I actually started writing it for my children because I thought I wanted them to know what had happened, but obviously it wasn't right for them to know the full story while they were still young. And so that's why I started writing it. And then obviously it happened as a discovery for me. So I found the diaries as I was writing this. And it has been cathartic to some extent. Having my voice heard is very important. But I don't think it's something you sort of move on from in that sort of way. You know, this is my life. This is part of who I am. And I need to live with it rather than move away from it.
Helen, thank you so much for coming on. And anyone who is fascinated by this story, wants to know more about Munchausen's, or, you know, perhaps wants to connect with people who have gone through a traumatic childhood, you can get Helen Naylor's book, My Mother, Munchausen's and Me. Still to come on the afternoon agenda, we'll be hearing what you think about Omicron. As you get the final word on the subject, I'm back after a short break.
I think you'll be happy in the future, too.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Well, let's go back to our main story of the day. And the government has said it's taking a proportionate response to the new Omicron strain of COVID-19. 6.9 million additional people over 40 will be eligible for a booster jab. Eligible individuals will be jabbed by the end of January. Let's remind you of the new measures that the governments have put in place. From today, the dreaded masks are mandatory in shops and on public transport. Woo-hoo. Families of those who test positive will also have to isolate for 10 days, regardless of vaccination status. People arriving in the UK will also have to take a PCR test and self-isolate. Other new details. Everyone 18 and over will be offered a booster jab. Children aged 12 to 15 will be invited for a second dose. Our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, has been out on the streets of Nottingham getting reaction to the news.
I think it's somewhat pointless as the virus is too small in diameter. It'll pass through most fabrics. Most people aren't wearing masks correctly. And it just seems pointless as to why we're doing it. It just seems a knee-jerk reaction from a virus that's potentially milder than the one that's circulating.
I think it's a good idea. They do protect other people and me as well. I think, I'm convinced that they do. It's a good idea, and they're brought in at the right time as well, I think.
I think they should have never stopped it. Never. And people are just, you look around, they're so complacent, but it can happen to anybody. We should all do it.
Well, I think it's a good thing. We've got to look after each other. The world's so much different now, and I obviously don't like wearing a mask because it makes you feel a bit sort of closed in, but I don't want to catch anything.
We've never stopped wearing them, but I think it's a good... Well, I think the government have acted quite well, to be quite honest with you, especially with Christmas coming up. It's just a bit of extra protection for people, isn't it?
Well, meanwhile, our North West reporter Bradley Harris visited Bolton earlier to find out what they make of the situation there.
As I'm in a bus station, I will pop on my face covering like many other people who are having to do that today because it is mandatory. The government have made it mandatory to wear a face covering now in places like a bus station. And people here in Bolton are adhering to those rules. There are many people here today who are putting a face mask back on. There are colleagues from Transport for Greater Manchester who are walking around this complex with boxes of face coverings, handing them out to members of the public who may have forgotten or maybe not even aware that these new measurements are in place today. There are a couple of people though around me that have decided not to wear one today, maybe because they weren't aware or simply are choosing not to. Of course, some people are exempt from wearing a face covering and don't have to wear one. There was one gentleman this morning who said to me that actually he isn't going to wear one, and if the bus driver asks him to put a face covering on, then he will put one on. But if he isn't going to be asked, then he simply isn't going to put a face covering on. So some people are a little bit sceptical about this. Of course, many people are kind of unsure whether using a face covering when they haven't had one on for quite some time is the right thing to do now. Whether it actually works is what some other people are telling me scientifically. Is it even working wearing a face covering? What's the science behind it? But again, others are willing to put on their face covering simply if it means that they can see their family at Christmas. Earlier on, I was chatting to some members of the public about this face covering decision and them coming into force today. Let's just hear what some members of the public had to say earlier today.
As a young person, I'm quite worried because, well, we don't know much about it, so I'm just being cautious.
We're the younger generation, and I haven't taken the vaccine yet, so I'm not really that worried about it, to be honest. Yeah.
I'm not worried, but I do think there'll be another lockdown.
What are your thoughts on face coverings becoming mandatory in bus stations, on buses, and in shops again? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't really like wearing them, but if I have to, I will do. Well, I'd like to see everything go back to normal. That's the whole point of having your jabs, I think.
Some people will be used to it, so they're just like, okay, it's going to happen. It was going to happen anyway. But for me, I didn't even expect it because it's like 1 minute I'm going to college, just like every other person, like my age, and then I get a message from my mum saying that she found out on social media that the face masks were being brought in on Monday, and it's like, well, that's new.
So those are the views from some members of the public here today in Bolton. It's interesting, isn't it, from that gentleman just then saying that he found out about these new measurements from social media via his mother. It kind of asks the question, how good are the government communicating this? How good is the communication from the government with these new measurements? Here in the bus station, there is a sign saying you must wear a face covering on public transport. They are dotted around this big complex today, but still people are waking up, not realising that these new measurements have come into force, and some are finding out simply by checking on social media sites. So at the moment, people are queuing up right now for the number 7 bus, and it looks like that everybody is wearing a face covering, but take a bit further down, and we've got another bus, the number 36, there's 2 people not wearing one. So it's mixed messages, and whether later on in the day and with days to come as these measurements start to take place, people start to realise the importance of wearing one and decide to, that's up to them. But at the moment, there are some people here who are wearing them and some that aren't.
Well, the airwaves are abuzz, aren't they, with the new Omicron strain and the government's announcement of the new restrictions being put in place. And you guys have had a lot to say for yourselves. One viewer says, it seems to me that it is the media that are blowing Omicron out of all proportion. Oh, not here on GB News. The government have introduced mandatory face masks. That's it. Another says, not worried about the new strain, worried about the fact the lateral flow test I picked up yesterday was manufactured in China. I'm not too concerned because the international community is prepared for it in terms of information sharing, testing, travel restrictions, research of new threats, assessing them against existing vaccines and the development of boosters. We should be more vigilant about hysteria and governments using that as a pretext to stifle our civil liberties. Well, there you are. Can't say that I'm a big fan of any of this stuff coming back. I'm a bit tired of it all. But there you are. I guess we've all got to go through the whole pantomime just in time for Christmas. Now, do keep on getting in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. There's a lot, of course, to cover. Will you be getting a booster vaccination if you're double vaccinated? Do you think that, well, it's just a shot in the arm? Do you think that it's absolutely necessary? Are you confused by the mixed messaging where, in the same breath, it seems to have been said that this new virus might be able to circumvent the vaccine, and yet the way potentially to stop it is getting a booster jab? Do let me know your thoughts here at GB News. We're a community with our audience, and your views matter to us. Now, day 2 of Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking trial is underway in New York today. Prosecutors say Jeffrey Epstein's ex-girlfriend was partners in crime with her former partner, accusing the financier of being an essential part in allowing him to prey on underage girls. Maxwell's representatives say she's being used as a scapegoat because of the government failing to bring Epstein to trial. Both sides gave opening statements, and witness statements are expected to continue throughout the day, laying out evidence to the jury. Well, Lisa Bloom is an American attorney who represents one of Ghislaine Maxwell's. I don't think we have her, unfortunately. We can't go to Lisa Bloom right now. Transatlantic communications, always difficult in the best of times. Well, let's have a little look at what the Prime Minister said earlier. Boris Johnson explained the thinking behind the introduction of the new COVID-19 Omicron strain measures.
I first of all want to thank the NHS for the GPs, all the staff, the volunteers here at centres like these up and down the country. They've been working so hard. If you think about what they've done in the last year or so, hundreds of millions of vaccines have been distributed. Over 100 million vaccines have been distributed, and the effort has been incredible. And I know that people will be thinking, have we got to make another great surge like we did earlier this year? And I'm afraid the answer to that is yes. And I just want to say that we'll throw everything at it. And I hope that we can do the same thing again, because everybody can see the situation. We've got a we've made a huge amount of progress against the Delta version of the virus, of coronavirus. We now have this question about the Omicron variant that has been located in some parts of the world and now in the UK as well. And while there's doubt about what exactly that variant can do, what we do know is that the boosters can give you a lot of protection against all types of the virus. And we think that's overwhelmingly likely at any rate. So the crucial thing is for everybody now to come out and get your boosters. And that's what the JCVI are now saying. And we've no doubt at all that the NHS, all the volunteers, the army, everybody can rise to the challenge. Is it going to be hard work? Yes, it is, but I know that people can do it.
Now, people are understandably worried whether or not they should modify their behaviour. I just want you to talk a little bit about what people should and shouldn't do in the next few weeks.
Yes.
For instance, should parents not expect to see nativity plays face-to-face? Could schools close early? Should people just pause booking that foreign Christmas holiday?
Okay, Sam, well, look, just on all that, we're not changing the guidance on how you should basically be living your life, except in a couple of ways, and that's to do with putting a mask on in some contexts, such as retail and public transport, to stop transmission, and also making sure that we check people when they arrive into the country. Because what we're trying to deal with here is the potential threat from Omicron, and what we need to do is delay the seeding of Omicron in this country. That's why tough checks at the borders are so important. But we don't see any need at present, certainly, to change the overall guidance about how people should be living their lives. And provide people continue to be cautious and sensible, we think that's the right approach. Because if you look at what's happening with the overall state of the pandemic, the Delta, our strategy for fighting the Delta version, the one that's been
well, that was Boris Johnson speaking to us earlier. You've been watching The Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips. Join me again tomorrow from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. Coming up next, of course, it's the wonderful Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. You don't want to miss it, but for me, it's goodbye. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. It's been much milder today, but colder air is going to return. Certainly feeling cold in the winds tomorrow. A bit brighter with some sunshine, but there will be showers, and those showers in places likely to turn wintry. This area of low pressure is developing, and as it heads into the North Sea, really producing some strong winds across the coast of northeast England again. And after Storm Arwen hits at the weekend, that is not good news for this part of the world. As well as the winds picking up, there's going to be plenty of rain around. That rain turning heavy at the moment across Scotland. A band of rain will whiz across England and Wales this evening, followed by some very lively showers when the winds will suddenly just whip up. So you may get woken up by the gusty winds tonight. Temperatures dropping down, but generally staying a few degrees above freezing, thanks mostly to the strength of the wind. That wind will be very lively then along some North Sea coasts in the morning, providing plenty of showers here as well. Some of those could be of hail, rain showers for Wales, southwest England, and the showers turning more and more wintry over northern Scotland as the day goes on. But there will be sunny spells, and there's going to be a cold feel to the day. Temperatures back to single figures, and add on that wind, it feels even colder. Certainly getting pretty cold on Wednesday evening, with further snow likely over northern Scotland, and then the potential through tomorrow evening for a mixture of rain, sleet and some snow to push south over southwest Scotland, northwest England into parts of Wales. So in this zone you may wake up to a covering on Thursday morning. The potential for things to turn icy as well, because as the winds ease, temperatures will drop further. So it's a cold start to Thursday. Could be some ice around and still some snow mixed in as this weather system trickles south across Wales into southwest England on Thursday morning. So again, may wake up to a covering in places here. Generally a fine sunny day on Thursday, but it will be cold, but those winds at least will be a little bit lighter.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
think you'll be happy in the future too.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation.